Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this installment of the Esri Emergency Management webinar series, where we'll be talking about creating an effective director's daily briefing. My name is Ryan Landklaus. I'm the Director of Public Safety here at Esri. And joining me today is John Petter, who's on our public safety team as a solutions engineer. A lot of real-world practical experience in creating briefings. And so we're going to share some of that knowledge and some of the challenges and how we've overcome those and have seen the community in general overcome those challenges around building really an effective both daily briefing as well as an operational briefing whenever you get into those incident specific situations. So today is all about walking through that process. We're going to cover a review from our last webinar about the emergency management operations solution, just for context. Then we'll talk a bit about the challenges with existing briefings and the way that many of you are probably operating today with PowerPoints and static briefs, and then truly transition to how you can create an effective brief, and we'll show you some templates and solutions around that effort, and then we'll take your questions to kind of guide you along the path moving forward after today. So a bit of housekeeping up front. So notice that everybody has been muted for today's webinar. So if you do have questions, feel free to chat anytime along the way. So in your GoToMeeting session there, you can actually chat, ask questions of the team online, and we've got folks that are fielding questions as they go along today. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask those questions through the chat window. We'll then pull a few of those forward into the Q&A at the end. If there's kind of cross-cutting, really broad questions I think are applicable to everyone, we're sure to kind of broadcast those so that all of us learn. And if we don't get to your question today, don't worry. Right? We'll definitely follow up after the webinar to make sure that we answer any of those questions that have come in. We are recording today, so after this webinar, this will be posted online inside of the Public Safety Webinar Series. You can find that at esri.com under the Public Safety Industry Solutions tab. You'll see the webinar series where you can find both upcoming webinars as well as recordings from past webinars from all of our different segments in public safety. And you'll also get an email from us after that. So there will be a few links coming out of today that will guide you on the path of where to start. So you'll get an email with us, both with links to the recording, but also links to follow up on and direct you into solution to opportunities for education and for learning as you move out of today. Okay, so getting started, looking back at our May, for those of you who have been part of our series for 2018, we've covered a number of different topics. And in May, for the middle of the year, we really talked about this new set of solutions, right, that we have, the solution configuration that we have for emergency management to help us manage both the daily and the incident operations of an organization. And so why do we do that? Well, there are a number of common challenges I think that we have learned through talking with you, our users, through responding as our disaster response program, both domestically and abroad over the last 20 years, and really looking at what the new normal is for all of us in 2018, meaning 2017 for us as a company was the busiest on record in terms of the number of responses that we had for the disaster response program. It was the most costliest year on record in the US in terms of dollar amounts around disasters and the impact they had on communities. And so what that teaches us is that we have something new, right? There's a new scale, a new complexity, and a new frequency cadence of events and incidents that we have to be ready for. And in doing that, this common challenge list really came to the top of the pile. So, we get common requests and ask all the time about how do we understand who and what's being impacted by an incident? How do we then determine the right posture and the right resourcing limits to then effectively respond and manage those resources as efficiently as possible? And then during an incident and even just the day-to-day business of our world being kind of wired up with sensors, how do we monitor ongoing activity around us, really in these dynamically changing conditions like a wildland fire or a flood? And then if we're doing that, how do we manage and communicate outwards? So we're making these operational decisions. We are communicating that out both inside the organization to our partners and to our constituents. And then at some point, we have to start conducting a damage assessment as quickly as possible so that we can access that threshold that opens up recovery funds. And so we talked a bit about damage assessment and providing real-time operational briefs as one of those challenges. And the last one we talked about was, that we hear repeatedly is how do I communicate effectively both with the public and the media so that we're getting information, authoritative information out into the public's hands both before, during, and after an incident. And so I would encourage you, if you have not taken a look at that webinar, to go back to the webinar series, look at the May webinar is a good place to start. It is really the foundation that talks about how we can develop a location strategy that really helps against these key challenges, right? These pillars that we find in operations for emergency management. It's understanding who and what. It's maintaining that situational awareness against your indicators, doing that damage assessment, both in a mobile field environment that may be disconnected as well back into the office. And so for each one of those patterns, for each one of those workflows, there is a solution that we can help you configure, right? So there's a place to start if you have a challenge in one of those areas. So for situational awareness, we can help you monitor and maintain kind of situational awareness around your operations in real time. And there's a couple of solution templates to get you started with configuring the operations dashboard on the left that you see here with against KPIs that really report that real-time information. And then conversely, in the bottom right, the ability to edit and update operational information back into that. So as you're executing those plans, you're executing your plan against the changing conditions, you're monitoring that. You're also then communicating that back into the dashboard so that others see. So this becomes kind of a two-way flow of information from the bottom right, where you're input information, you're changing information on the fly, dynamically updating your operational decisions back into the upper left, where people are monitoring and kind of getting that high-level picture of what's going on, not just of your operations, but surrounding things like weather conditions as they change. We talked about understanding impact, so there is a solution template. So when you have an incident layer, whether that's a fire perimeter, a flood perimeter, or just a location of an incident that's occurred, either a point, line, or polygon, the ability to quickly intersect that feature with your base information and with some Esri provided demographics and information that allow you to quickly understand and gain deeper insight into what is underneath that area. So meaning, how many schools do you see on the screen? How many students may be a part of that? How many pieces of critical infrastructure are there? The demographic profile underneath that area that helps us, again, posture and determine effective resourcing for that. Public information is one of those key challenges, and for a number of reasons. One is, how do we then make sure that these information is conveyed in bite-sized chunks? So if you think about the media cadence, people need that 30-second takeaway. So how do you quickly do that? And maps provide all the context in the world for a lot of the information we have coming out of our organizations. So there's a place to start with a template, a solution around conveying that information in the public environment, but also making sure there's some best practice around that so that those applications scale when the news media picks it up and they start to run with that application and it gets embedded in websites or the media. Make sure that it can stand up to the load. So we can talk about that in more detail, and you'll hear some of that on the webinar. And then on the damage assessment front, right, it's around how do we both in the field collect that information. So the form on the right-hand side is Survey 123. We're collecting initial damage assessments following the FEMA standard form back into an operations center view on the left-hand side, which is, again, a dashboard configured to monitor the thresholds for damage estimates, as well as the structural information coming in from that damage assessment, major, minor distorted, as you see at the bottom, so that you're able to report and monitor that activity and again, increase efficiencies, find the quickest way to hit that threshold, and then do some reporting so that information moves you along the process much quicker. And then the last thing not to be forgotten, I think, is the idea that in many environments, we still need a way that we can produce paper map products, hard copy products, in a really rapid way. And that will never go away. And so there is a way to do that inside of the solution. And so the emergency management maps is a way that, number one, you can create standard map templates and products and publish those on demand. So you can push those things out as quickly as possible during a really rapidly changing condition. And that could be 8.5 by 11. It could be large format walls that you may have to use for briefing purposes still today. And those would accompany what we're going to talk about next, which is really shifting the thought process around this last challenge, right? This last workflow, which is, how do we do this effectively? You've got a ton of those information products we just described, moving information between different areas of your organization. Your organization is interfacing with partner agencies and with the public. And ultimately, decision makers need a distilled set of information to make actionable decisions as quickly as possible, right? So what we're going to talk about today in detail is this specific workflow of that solution that we laid out in May, and you just kind of heard in a summary form, which is, how do we provide real-time and operational briefs? So taking it a level down, just like we talked about challenges generally for public safety and operations, there's really some specific challenges that we hear over and over when we talk to individuals about, how do I do this differently, right? So the existing environment today is that many directors receive email reports in the morning, and those email reports may require login to multiple different systems. That may be multiple reports coming together to get aggregated, and that's done manually in a lot of cases, right? An analyst is having to compile information from a number of different sources, put that into some format that gets emailed over, or perhaps it's just a PDF brief that's there. But the fact you've got multiple daily reports that require this manual process is really difficult. It's time consuming on both the staff environment, but also time consuming on the director's part, because getting actual information out of those multitude of resources is difficult. And so a lot of times it's how do we filter away some of the noise and filter up the things that help them gain actual intelligence, so know when to take action or where to be prepared for, so that the posture of the organization is at a readiness level that's appropriate for that. And then the last thing, kind of thinking about this, is that those briefs that go into the director's hands, right, after we've done all the data collection, we do the writing of some narrative, we've taken the time to do that, as soon as we hit send on those operational briefs or those daily briefs, that information in static form is out of date. Right? Especially if you think of an operational brief during an incident, right? So each operational period, the organization's having to almost, in a sense, hit pause for a second. We take screenshots, we write the narrative, we compile the report, and we send that off, and we continue back to our jobs, right? Assignments inside of the organization to manage the incident. And in that process, information never stopped flowing, right? So you're almost then playing catch up immediately, coming back from the assembling of that information to kind of distill what you've missed, and you're trying to take action moving forward. And so information never stops, even on a daily basis. And so how do we help solve that problem? And the lack of information in an interactive form is challenging for a lot of people. So many times when we get information presented to us in a report or a form, right, without additional context, it's hard to really understand what the impact might be of that information, or to really understand where I should or should not take action based on a number of other things that may be cascading around that piece of information. And so when these static PowerPoints show up, if we don't have a good interaction, the ability to dive in, to have a conversation around that, and to let people kind of explore relevant bits of information for additional context, we've kind of missed the opportunity. And so today we're going to talk about how you can address those challenges. So we're going to look at providing real-time interactive briefings, not static PowerPoints, as a way that you can aggregate existing information products that you may have inside of your organization, like dashboards or story maps you may be using, or reports that come from the web, or a video report that comes from the news media, photos in the field, or even just a static report that gets generated automatically, or part of a plan that you want to insert. How do you take all those bits of information, those different information products and their different formats, and aggregate them together into a usable form that allows the director to explore the narrative, right? To move through the standard process in a very logical way, to interact when appropriate, to dive in and ask questions of that data, and then to stop and have a conversation with the staff to really explain what we're seeing. And I think if we can do that well, we've changed the paradigm of what briefings really look like, and the process by which we're going to go through the briefing cadence. So with that, we're going to stop right now. We're going to talk about where you even begin, right? Because if you're immediately kind of taking notes and you're thinking about all the information you've got at your fingertips and all the reports that you have, and you may be thinking on the other hand of that coin is, I'm not even sure exactly what actual information means, what KPIs and what things we should be tracking yet, without having a conversation. Let's start there. Let's talk about, where do you begin this process of having a conversation? And then how do you start to stitch those things together into a usable format for an interactive briefing, and where you go next? So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John Petter to kind of dive into it. So John, the floor is yours. Thank you, sir. John, I think you're on mute if you're still there.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. That's Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so we're going to build upon what Ryan's been speaking about with these operational briefs, and kind of go through some of the things that I've found and some best practices I've come across when putting these together. So let's just get started with some basic design considerations when you're starting to look at some of these, putting something like this together. How you do things today, Ryan had mentioned there might be email reports. They could be spreadsheets. You might be getting PDFs, and the decision makers, the directors, are getting sort of bombarded with many reports each day. How many are they receiving, and are they actually effective? Are they being read? People are putting time and energy into creating these, and are they being used and actioned upon? Are they awkward to update? Some of the PowerPoints I've seen and on briefings take a lot of people, a lot of time to put together. And the data in there, as Ryan mentioned, the moment you hit send is sort of out of date. So who is going to use the products? This is the first piece to think about here. Is this going to be sort of a governor level, and a director level of an emergency management agency, assistant directors? Where are the products being targeted to? Do these need to support just your daily operations, your blue sky operations? And do they need to support the gray sky events as well? These are some discussions you can have sort of early to sort of figure out what are we replacing and how are we replacing it. Often gray sky events can be moved into the daily brief until they become a critical size. And once they get to a larger scale, you might need a separate product specifically to manage that event. We need them to be easy to update. So the good thing about sort of using live maps is if it's tied into your business systems already, the data in the maps and the dashboards, they can automatically update. And then all that really needs to be updated within the briefing is the narrative that goes along with it. Being able to spread the workload, so it's not one person that has to do all this consolidation, all the copy and paste into a single PowerPoint. How do we manage that so that different people are responsible for different parts of the updating? I remember when you're going through this process, it's not an all or nothing. If the director is currently receiving 25 reports by email, how do we take the burden off of some of that, maybe by 5 reports or 10 reports? What's the way to get things going and moving in the right direction? So you don't have to eat the whole elephant in one bite. So the big part here are the relationships. I've seen many times where the GIS folks and the directors or the decision makers haven't really had a lot of discussion. The discussion has normally been, I need a map. Yes, sir, I'll get you a map. No one has actually gone through and asked, what do you want on there? And if you ask, what do you want on there? Often the answer will be, heck, I want everything. I want it all on the map. Well, we know that it really doesn't work, and it's not a real solution. So you have some of the people going and sort of just trying to create what they think is needed rather than actually having a discussion. So actually putting this together and sitting down in an office or a conference room and going through this is a really useful process to do, and it sort of establishes those relationships and the collaboration between the GIS folks and the decision makers. So when you're walking into a meeting like this, have a few examples to go in with. It's often difficult to say to someone at the director level, I'm going to build you an operations dashboard. What's one of those? Go in with an ops dashboard. Use some of our solutions pages. Use some of those for the incident briefing. Use those as examples so that you've got something to discuss when you get to that meeting, rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper. Generally, the GIS guys always say, "Hey, I've got all the answers. What questions are you asking?" So just to ask these things, go in with a list of tasks. And lastly, just because you've been doing it that way forever doesn't mean it's always the right way to do it. So be open to new ideas, listen to people, and look at the process. So one place I like to start here as well is, once we got into the room, we've had a discussion and showed a few thoughts and ideas. What is the most important data to the decision makers? List those out. I've got some of the data feeds listed here. You may have others. So maybe some of your CAD data, your traffic data from Department of Transportation. Think about all the layers that we've got in the Living Atlas that Esri curates for you. Most of the Earth observation layers provide really good context around incidents and briefings. Some of your other business systems, maybe you've got WebEOC as your emergency management system of record. Are you tied into that? So what feeds and boards are enabled in there that want to be reported on constantly? Partner agencies, you may have fusion centers or fire EMS, law enforcement, traffic cameras, whether those come from your own Department of Transportation or even external providers and partner agencies. Think about power outages from the power companies. Commercial feeds, what can you buy off the shelf that really fits and provides a good briefing? And then what data don't you have that you've been wanting to try and get access to, or you really think will be useful? If you're in a room with the director, use the opportunity. We don't have access to one of these data feeds because of whether it's politics or technology. But now you've got someone higher up the chain who can help leverage access to that data. So once you've listed your data, is it usable? So if you've got PDFs coming in, that takes somebody manually now to figure out how to extract the data from that PDF and repopulate it. Where is the source of the original data? Someone turned it into a PDF. How do I get access to that? Is it spreadsheets, KML, or are we lucky enough to have services? So how do you enable all those different pieces? And that's a really big part of the picture. So some of these reports you may want to be sort of living live, but if the data from the original sources is difficult to harvest, you actually need to go all the way back to the data source and figure out how do you enable those and get those into the enterprise. So what products fit? What do I mean by this? There's a lot of different products and applications out there. I've mentioned a couple already. We've got operations dashboard, we've got web app builder templates, we've got all this. How do we know what's the right fit? So we need to figure out what the right fit products are. And again, if you go to the solution pages, there's some really good work been done there to help you sort of craft that and start. So the whole goal of the exercise is to take the data and turn it into information and provide that to decision makers that can now basically self-brief. They've got a product that they can wake up in the morning, turn on their tablet, an iPad, open it up, and they've got the information that they need to make decisions for the day. So keep the goal in mind during the design process. And here's a big one. Because you can fit 50 elements onto a dashboard, that doesn't mean that's a useful dashboard to achieve the goal above, which is provide information. So don't shove everything into a single product. You can make it bite-sized pieces. If the data is auto-updating, once you've built the product, it pretty much stands alone and lives by itself. Really consider formatting. You're going to have people being able to now click on the products that you create, and that might bring up something as simple as the pop-up. Consider what's displayed in that pop-up, and is it legible? Do you really need lat long in there or some other code values and field names that are rather obscure? Take some time and format things like pop-ups. And we just call it maps for humans. And that's what we're trying to sort of transform some of these GIS products into things that regular folks can understand. So I've mentioned the solutions. So I just wanted to give you a URL where you can start to find these things. So the Esri solutions templates can help get you going. And there's a whole suite in there around emergency management. And I started off by talking about the products. So here's some of the products which are really, really useful for presenting these things. So it's really good to go through a design process. And this is just a whiteboard screenshot of a design process. You can see how formal that is. But it's literally listing out the data on the left, figuring out what product it goes into, then figure out what the configuration of it is. And that's this collaborative process with the folks who are going to be actually using the products. So I've talked a little bit about the products, and before I get in on this and talk about the design process for each one, I thought I would just sort of jump into an example and give you a view of what does this all mean. So what we found is a really good briefing container is a story map. And Esri's got several story maps, different templates available. The ones that you're seeing on the screen here is a map journal, and we found this to be very useful. Others have used some of our tabbed products, and I'll I'll go through several examples in a few minutes. But let's take a quick look and see what this looks like. So here is a story map journal, and this is all synthetic data in here, by the way, except for the weather data, which is coming out of our Living Atlas. So I've now got a fully interactive map inside my dashboard, but the dashboard can do something that a lot of products can't. In addition to the map, you can pull the metrics out, so you actually have the numbers to look at. And for someone that's getting a briefing daily, they've got an idea of what those numbers are good and what numbers are bad. So just by taking a quick glance at a dashboard like this and having effective metrics given on page 1, whether they be individual elements or more interactive charts, being able to take things like weather and seeing what the forecast is, and then having some narrative around this as well. So on the left, we've got space for all the narrative. We've got our activation status. Where's our EOC right now? Where's our Threat Analysis Center? And then I find something that's very important here is to have a link, a URL on the left that allows this dashboard to be opened in full screen. This makes it now usable as a container for maybe in the operations center, so that if you just want to have this big dashboard as a standing product, the dashboard is available as a standing product by opening it in a new tab. So it's the little things that can really help. There's a table of contents listed, and this enables you to jump easily to any section. Or you can just use the navigation tools provided in the map journal here on the left. So each one of these is an individual product. So the first one was an operations dashboard, and then this is actually another story map. So this is a story map, which is a tabbed format embedded within the bigger context of my brief, my journal. So this is news. So there might be news which comes up on the local level. Directors might need to understand what's going on at a regional level or county levels. National level is often useful to have as context. And then what's going on the global level that they need to know. So these can be harvested from your own sources or just commercial sources, but they've been placed into context for the director so they don't have to go digging around the news. It's been presented to them within this format. The order that these are displayed is also very important, and this is for discussion. When you open up the container for the first time, what's the first thing that needs to be shown and why? And then as you come down through these different products, again, we've got different context here on the left, and we've got some more interactive lists here on the left. This is a situational awareness viewer. Ryan spoke about this earlier. Again, we've got a template to help you with this. And we can look at some of the events that are happening, dive in, and now this is an interactive way for a director to understand what do I have within the area of incidents happening. The incident feed can be from your CAD, it can be from other places. So let's jump back in and take a look at how we actually go about designing some of these. So a process I like to do is to go back to that data. Where's all my data and what are they? Listed them out and we said, okay, design goal for this one is to create something that looks like a situational awareness viewer. We went into the meeting, we were prepared. We had the solutions template already on screen, and we went through the director and said, this is what it looks like. What data do you want in here? So as an example, the feeds here might be your CAD feed, your incidents. Maybe we subscribe to a global incidents feed like the NC4 feed I just showed you. And maybe you want to know when these incidents come in, what does it look like in relation to my critical infrastructure? Or how many people, my demographics, and that might be some Esri data. So you start to go through what data do I have and how does it support the information product that I'm trying to create on the other end of this. The next discussion was around a dashboard. So understand daily operational load and cadence. So again, the dashboard has got this great ability to pull the metrics and the numbers underlying the map and present them in a very human, easy to read format. Going back to the mantra, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You can layer dashboards quite considerably now, especially with the new dashboard designs. But pay attention to how much you put into one dashboard and make sure the context is correct. Trying to mix 4 or 5 different contexts into one dashboard often isn't the best design idea. But again, I'm listing my data feeds and my data sources, and this is spurring a discussion with the directors. What do you want on here? What's the most important thing you need to see? Where does that live on this dashboard to stand out to you? Is it what's in red at top left? Is that what's most important? Or is it the weather on this one that's the most important? What's the context for the dashboard? And then to consolidate the product. So I just showed you an example of a map journal used to do that. And we've actually got an incident briefing as an example of that in our solutions that you can use to work with. But what's the goal? The goal was originally that the director was receiving 20 or more reports every day. How do I provide single access to a URL that can be refreshed on a browser, and you've got access to all that information in one easy to find location? So the story maps we found have been a sort of an ideal medium to deliver that. What order are the products presented in? This again is another discussion. Does it change from a gray sky to a blue sky? Do I need a different product? So if the dashboard is always number 1, if an event or an incident's taking place, you have a flood or a fire, does that need to be replaced? And so within the story maps, you can actually hide tabs. So you can have lots of standing products available that can be turned on or off easily by hiding or showing those. So let's just go and take a look at a few examples. I'd started off by showing you this sort of sample here, feed, and I've got some more actions here on the left. So I showed you links earlier and the link to open into a full screen. But we can also use map actions. So within one tab, I can have multiple products loaded in here. So this is another dashboard that might show hospital bed counts and hospital status from within the area. Activations and government status may be something that is quite easy to put in by polygons. Often people will have this, if you're a web EOC or using other incident management systems, you probably already have this data that exists. So how do you now populate that and show what's going on? There might be threat analysis that might go into other partner agencies requiring additional credentials, but these can all be provided in the context of one single story map and one single location to find all this information. Weather is often of importance because that's where most of our natural disasters come from, whether that's fire-related weather, storm-related weather. So this here is a dashboard which is bringing live weather feeds right in from Esri's Living Atlas and showing you exactly what's going on. As you scroll and change the extent of the map, you can see all the widgets here on the left, pulling those metrics out for you and giving you context of what's going on. So this can be a really important feed as well. But what else is available? So there's live stream gauges. This is again using the map actions within the map, within the story map. So we can look at the stream gauges and flood levels. There's an ice forecast. We've got regional storm reports. There's hurricane data, snowfall and forecast data, and even wildfire activity. So all of this information can be easily presented in here where you can, as a conversation is taking place, an executive is discussing this with one of the directors. He's got all the information, he or she's got the information at their fingertips. Traffic is another big product. We've tied some of this into Waze and also some of Esri's live traffic services. So the discussion of taking something like this as an example and walking through these steps is what's going to lead you down the path to the right direction to creating a successful briefing. Let's take a look at some others briefings and some other examples here. So I mentioned that there's a place to get started. So we've actually got a whole set of solutions templates for emergency management. This includes situation awareness, maps to do that, application templates. These are all available online, and you can use these to start the discussion, including brief incident personnel. This is more tied to an incident rather than a daily brief, but the concepts and the construct is the same. So this might be your incident briefing. We're looking at a flood here, and we've got, again, the live map. We've got all the context here on the left. And as we go through the product, it's giving different context and providing different information, which all the data here in the web map hopefully are living services, and that's being updated. So someone just needs to come in and understand what's the narrative should be on the left, and then you have your new daily briefing. Some other examples from our customers. So this is MEMA, Massachusetts, and they've done a really nice job of leveraging one of our story maps into a tabbed format. So at the top, it starts off with weather, and then they're leveraging the NOAA weather watches and warnings. And again, this comes from Esri's Living Atlas. Temperature and wind. So this is also brought in from Esri's Living Atlas, live, and you've got live wind services and strengths and directions all put in context. And this is a web app builder app actually embedded within the story map. Precipitation, they have the river stages, and even satellite imagery, and then about at the end. So this is something that can be internal and external. So this is a public-facing version, but it's the same idea of going through who's my audience, what am I trying to present, and how am I doing it. Arizona has another successful implementation using a tab map, but if you notice here, there's a map journal embedded within the first tab. They've also chosen to go with an ESF-focused delivery. The nice thing there is that each ESF actually exists within the base map itself. So the story map contains all the ESFs, and you only just need to show and hide the ESFs that are pertinent to the briefing of that stage. So if there aren't big fires or flooding going on, I might not need to show some of that. But some of these are going to be sort of standing, like sort of mass care and logistics. But you can see here that we can step through the 4th of July restrictions, all within a context of this story map below, even including video. And then you can step through each of the ESFs, which is being presented here within the product, whether they're using some of the dashboards to do the metrics, energy, and recovery. And they've also got some standing weather over here as well, which is always good to include. FEMA also leverages Esri's templates for their briefings, and they've chosen to, again, use a map journal format. But the format, there's no right or wrong format to use for these briefings. Back to the discussion and back to the collaboration. This is the discussion that you're having with the directors, with the people that are actually consuming these. Go in and show them 2 or 3 examples. Show them Arizona, show them MEMAs, show them FEMAs, and talk about what's the best for them. Sometimes people don't want a lot of narrative on the left, and they really just want the products. That's when maybe this format is more effective. But then maybe this is the more effective approach where you can put the more narrative in there. So FEMA goes through and lists their current events and activities, their tropical weather forecasts, and this is a standing product that's updated constantly because all of these are living and live feeds that they're leveraging. California and Cal OES has taken a slightly different approach where for the public, they're doing briefings by incident type. So you have a weather, you have a fire, and all these are available right on the front page of their ArcGIS online organization. So for instance, if we look at fires, and you can look at current fire activity, we've got an overview. It starts out with an overview of all the fires in the state. You can see that there's some pretty large ones up here. I think that's probably the county fire. But then there's tabs for each of the individual fires. So now this leverages a dashboard. So the dashboard again is pulling the metrics out so I can see how many acres were burned, how many personnel are actually on this incident right now. Where's the perimeter, and leveraging some of the Esri feeds here for MODIS data coming right in from the satellite. So this is a public-facing view, but I also know that ArcGIS has a internal-facing view for their own briefing products for their directors, and their director gets briefed every day using a map journal with all the context and all the products. But maybe he doesn't need to know about all the fires all the time. In the director's briefing, that can be more focused on what does he need to know, what are the biggest things, what have you talked to him about that he really needs to know, to understand. And then from there, all of this information was then made available to the public. Other examples of putting things together, this is an internal product that we've put together in Esri to show how you can leverage information coming from the Living Atlas of the world, use our solutions templates, and actually put that together in context. So this is also a tool you can use for those discussions. And it's leveraging solutions, something like the public information app, layering in all those Living Atlas data layers, and building solutions viewers for situation awareness. We have the public information map, and then we've also leveraged dashboard again for those metrics for all the different fires which are currently happening. So there's a lot of collateral available to you to walk into a meeting well armed, well prepared, to take in all the reports that are being used right now and ask some of those questions. What do you need, and how can I help? And lastly, I'll just return back to the solutions. We do have places for you to get started. So you're not always starting from that blank sheet of paper. In addition to all the examples I've shown you here, you can come in here to the ArcGIS Solutions for Emergency Management. We've got complete suites available for preparedness, response, and recovery. And all of these individual products can now be leveraged and put into that context of a product of products of a story map. So I hope you found this, this useful to sort of get you going on the path of changing over from the PowerPoints to a more engaging, live, dynamic products for daily briefings. With that, Ryan, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, John. So I think John did a really nice job of showing kind of the pathway to have a conversation, right? The design-centric approach to that, and then know that you've got a ton of resources, right? And I think you just being armed with the knowledge of the different types of solution that are out there, the information products that are available both in dashboards and story maps and forms, can let you be armed to go have that discussion. And it really should be an iterative approach, right? It's never meant to be, you've got the silver bullet as soon as you walk in. And so I think where we see the best traction being made is when somebody comes in and says, hey, we've got these different products. Let me show you how others are doing it. And then as John just described, iterate to find the right mix of products that works really well. And then more importantly is, what order do those products flow, right? So the more that you can distill the most pertinent information to the top of that chart, right, that's the opening page, that answers probably 80%, and then they dive down into the other information products below, as it's needed, can really save a lot of time and effort. And I think that goes to some of the challenges that we've seen of, how do I get actual information at my fingertips? How do I distill things back down? So that design process is not to be overlooked. We would just encourage you to keep on that path. So take a moment, if you would, if you do have questions, make sure you're chatting those in the window. We're going to answer a few of those questions here in just a moment. But for next steps, so John mentioned to you the solutions website. You can also go to the emergency management industry page. So esri.com/emergency will take you to that landing page. You'll see some examples of others, how they're doing those briefs today. You'll find some links there. The disaster response program, where we've talked about some of the gathering of requirements and how we're using these briefings as well. You'll find examples under esri.com/disaster. And then for those that are attending with us this weekend, starting on Saturday, we have the National Security and Public Safety Summit at the Esri UC. So on Saturday and Sunday, you're actually going to hear from several users that are doing effective daily briefs in their words at the National Security Summit. And you'll also see that during the Esri User Conference in our industry showcase in the Operations Center. So we'll dive into more detail. So if you do have questions, I would say next steps, find us there. both at the National Security Summit and at the Esri UC around the Public Safety Island. Let's talk, let's dig in, and you can stop by the emergency management kiosk. There will be a spot there. Myself, John will be there, Jeff Barani, who's on our team, will be there as well through various points. So you can certainly dig in on any specific tasks that you have from there. And then our next webinar, so we're actually going to be talking, one of the key points that John kind of mentioned in terms of getting dynamic data into your briefs, which is really the critical component, right? These aren't static snapshots. These are pulling live feeds and live services from your information into those briefs. One of the key ways that people do that is connecting to incident management. And so our partners at Juvari, who are the makers of WebEOC, will be joining us in September. So you can come back to the next webinar, September 6th, and we'll actually talk a bit more about where we are today, what's new with the integration between ArcGIS and WebEOC. That's a perfect place to maybe start a conversation. There's a series of those webinars that have already been recorded in the past. If you want to go back today, if you can't wait until September to kind of go and see what's historically been done, that's a great place to kind of figure out the connector. So there is an extension between ArcGIS and WebEOC that will allow you to connect boards directly to maps, and that allows you then to put those maps into those information products that can be wrapped into a brief. So with that, let's take a few questions. There are a couple of key ones here. I think they're really important. So I'll start here across the top, and just we'll kind of work our way down. So John, you mentioned, I think early on, the use of story maps, and you showed a bunch of examples. Is there a website or a place that you would recommend that people go to find story maps specifically for those that may want to learn how to use story maps, not just for briefings, but for other ways to communicate maybe public information and the like? Is there an example or formats that you'd point them to?
Absolutely, yes. Story Maps has a home, and it's storymaps.arcgis.com. And if you go to that URL, you will find examples there from a multitude of different industries. Once you get there, you can click on the gallery at the top of the screen, and you can search by type. So you could do emergency management, disaster, fire, and there's many examples in there which you can use again for those setup meetings.
Excellent.
So that's storymaps.arcgis.com.
Perfect, thanks, John. And then I think this is a great second question. So somebody asked the question about, a lot of these briefings, beyond just the director's daily brief, perhaps they're in an operations center and we're doing our operational briefs, right, each period, and that's kind of up and running. Is there a way that we can make these briefs autoplay so that they would essentially run through each page of the brief as it goes through and turn those things on in succinct order? Is there a way to autoplay that so it can be kind of run unattended, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. There is an unattended mode for that. You can also consider just building a separate story map product specifically for those automated plays. But on the end of any story map at all, in the URL at the very top, you can just, right at the very end, you can put ampersand autoplay and hit enter, and it will autoplay. Then you can actually adjust the time setting as it flips between each tab. Maybe your briefing map is going to be a good format for that, say, or maybe consider making a separate just command center story map with those dashboards, those products in it that can now flip. People can walk in and they can just be self-briefing as the autoplay keeps going. So good question.
Excellent, thanks. And then somebody asked questions about the dashboard itself. So can we get more information on operations dashboard? So I think, just a few of that really quick. You've seen a bunch of examples, even just the first one that John pulled up that has the KPI reporting on, the surrounding areas, the map element in the middle. So maybe that's the wildfire dashboard that we saw in examples. So if you want to learn more about how to configure the operations dashboard, the elements that are a part of that, so what types of reporting and widgets essentially can I use, whether that's dials and gauges or numbers. So my point I would encourage you back to, I would go back to the industry page, so Esri.com, and look for the emergency management industry page. And under the webinars, there actually is a past webinar about operations dashboard where we actually talk in detail. That was the first part of this year's series. So you can go back in that and you can see about 3 webinars back. We talked about operations dashboard in detail. So that's a really good overview of what elements exist inside of the new operations dashboard for ArcGIS, examples of how to configure a map to interface with the widgets. So for those of you working in that environment or new to that, that's a great place to start learning about that. So check out the webinar recording to get started. All right, let me look at a few other questions here. So we had one come in, John, maybe you could field this one for us. So the question was, what minimum version or what software do I need to do some of these briefings? So maybe to speak to a bit about the mix of software components that were used to produce these briefs as we saw today.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the software products you saw in here were the story maps. And for the story maps, if you have enterprise, your on-premise sort of WebGIS stood up, or if not, these are all today shown on ArcGIS Online. So you don't need any desktop software to get going. You can just start right on the web. But then a lot of this data as well did come from initially other data sources, and we used ArcGIS Pro and deployed some of these solutions right out of ArcGIS Pro. You can go to the solutions page and download the deployment tool, which brings all these solutions locally, and then you can deploy those into your WebGIS. And then it's a mixture of the different dashboards and web app builder configurations. Some of the time-aware templates are great for displaying some of the weather information. And on our last release, Web App Builder actually just has updated the time widget in there to give a lot more flexibility for showing forecast and real-time data. So you can now embed more functionality into Web App Builder. So you can use the whole suite of tools. Ryan had mentioned damage assessment and bringing some of that damage data in, and that might be coming from Survey 123 or Collector. But again, Survey 123, you can do that all on the web as well. So you can leverage all different parts of the Esri platform and the different tools and products to put this together. The real sort of crux of all of it is, what information am I providing to whom, and what format is the data coming to, and how do I present it in those usable information products so that every day people are getting what they need.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. And I would just say, for those that are just getting started, maybe you want to explore a bit. So if you go to the Story Maps website that John mentioned, so storymaps@arcgis.com, you can actually start building a story map directly from that site. So you're going to log in. So the minimum requirement, you need to log in to ArcGIS Online. Once you do that, you can actually start building a story map today, right? You can explore existing story maps. That's a good place to get started, maybe just to get your feet wet. And then to John's point, the ability to start, layering other maps together, bringing in data, doing your analysis points and stuff like that. ArcGIS Pro as a desktop license is kind of the next step. So between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Pro, you've got this suite of tools to really get started. And then, as he described, as you discover where information lives inside of your organization or even externally to the organization, then it helps us figure out where to go next. So if you have a specific question for those of you, where do I get started? How do I get data from this system to this system? Feel free to just, at the end when we hang up today, you'll get a survey. If you would just say, contact me now, and put a note in there about what you're specifically doing. If there's a connector you're looking for, or a specific business system, that'll help us, and we'll certainly follow up after today to have a more detailed question.
Actually, Ryan, if I may,
sure.
Listening to you speak there was something I'd neglected to mention was our geo event server. So that's one of the ways to actually tie those business systems into these live briefing products. Is GeoEvent can ingest all different formats of data, process it, and then turn it into a service. So really consider leveraging something like GeoEvents to help bring all your products to life and keep them updated.
Yeah, it's perfect. And for those of you that may be listening from the operations side of the house, you're not a GIS professional and you're thinking, hey, I want to do this when I get home. So everything that we just described between John and I on that side, say, talk to your GIS person inside the agency, tell them what you saw today, tell them, it's ArcGIS Online that I need access to, and I want to sit down and work with you on that. And that's a great place to have just a started conversation if you're coming from the operator perspective. So you've got probably armed with a lot of information today. Send them the link to this webinar, tell them you want to sit down and actually dig into how to do this together. So we've talked a lot from the GIS professional side of how to engage with the technology and go to the director of the operations level and have that conversation. That works just the same the other way, right? So we hope that you've been kind of empowered today to go and start that conversation, have a cup of coffee together and begin. So with that, we're hitting the top of the hour here on the last side. I would just, a couple of last things for housekeeping on the piece. Inside of the GoToMeeting, there are two little downloads. One of those that's really important for those that are coming next week to the Esri National Security Summit and to the Esri UC, there's a flyer in there. There's public safety events and activities. There's a PDF. So download that now before you leave. So that will have everything related to public safety over the next 14 days really for us as we kind of look starting today all the way through the end of next week. It'll list all the activities, workshops, demonstration theaters, special interest group meetings that you can find us at. And again, I would encourage you, come by and say hello. So myself, John, Jeff, the collective team will be there in the San Diego Convention Center during the week. Starting on Tuesday, you'll go in, you'll look for the public safety big banner right in the middle of the event center, and directly underneath the public safety area, you'll find emergency management, and there will be there kind of talking about the solution that we've talked about for operations, encompassing all of those different workflows, as well as the brief that we talked about today. And then you can come and see us on each of those days. As you'll find a demonstration there in the operations center about the solution, and we can certainly dig in and sit down and have more detailed conversations. So take advantage of that. Be sure to download the flyer. We'll see you guys there starting on Saturday. So with that, I just want to say thanks to John for presenting some of your knowledge and working through this. Thanks to all of you for attending on the 5th. For those that had a holiday yesterday, welcome back. If we're going to see you in San Diego, safe travels. We look forward to seeing you there. And if not, come join us again in September. We're going to talk again about WebEOC and ArcGIS and moving data from boards into maps that allow you to turn on a lot of these applications, just like you saw today as part of the continued series for emergency management. So with that, thanks to you for joining. Reach out anytime with questions. Never hesitate. So come back to us at any time. Chat in the window before you hang up, and we will certainly follow up, or send us an email when you get done. Thanks again, everybody.